Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of top-tier management research. I'm Pavlov.
And I'm Nikita.
Today we have a special Direct from the Editors episode for you.
Ooh, exciting.
We're diving into an editorial from the Journal of Management. You know, that FT50 journal that everyone's aiming for.
Oh, yeah?
It's all about something called phenomenon-based research. Big thanks to Fabrice Lumineau, Dishin Tonikong, and Nikki Dries for laying out this roadmap.
Okay, so what exactly is phenomenon-based research? It's a bit different from the traditional theory-driven approach.
Right.
Instead of starting with a theory and then looking for evidence to support it, phenomenon-based research starts with a real-world phenomenon that we want to understand better.
It's like saying, hey, this thing's happening in the world and it's really interesting. Let's study it and see what we can learn, rather than I have this theory, let's see if it applies to this situation.
Exactly. And the goal isn't necessarily to come up with a brand new theory right away. It's more about deeply understanding the phenomenon itself, its complexities, and its nuances.
So how do we choose the right phenomenon to study? The authors give us a handy tool called the prime criteria: pertinence, reach, insightfulness, magnification, and expediency. Think of it as a checklist for making sure your research is not only interesting, but also has real impact.
Love a good checklist.
Let's start with pertinence. This is all about choosing a phenomenon that's relevant to real-world issues. Imagine you're a manager trying to figure out how to lead a team in a constantly changing environment. A pertinent phenomenon might be the increasing use of artificial intelligence in the workplace.
Right. Or let's say you're interested in how organizations can become more sustainable. A pertinent phenomenon might be the growing consumer demand for eco-friendly products.
Exactly.
Now, reach goes beyond just managers. It's about choosing a phenomenon that has a wide impact affecting lots of different stakeholders. Think climate change, globalization, or the rise of the gig economy.
These are issues that touch everyone, not just people in the business world. They raise all sorts of questions about how we organize work, how we manage resources, and how we create a more just and equitable society.
Okay, next up is insightfulness. This is where things get really exciting. Insightfulness is all about choosing a phenomenon that has the potential to reveal something truly new and unexpected. Think of it like exploring uncharted territory.
It's about shining a light on those areas of management that haven't been studied in depth, or looking at familiar issues from a completely new angle.
Let's say you're interested in leadership. Instead of studying the traits of successful CEOs, you might choose to study leadership in a more unconventional setting, like a grassroots social movement that could lead to some really insightful findings about how leadership emerges and functions in different contexts.
Now, magnification. This one's about choosing a phenomenon that acts like a magnifying glass, amplifying or intensifying certain aspects of management that we might not see so clearly in everyday life. The authors use the example of organizations responding to extreme events like natural disasters.
Oh, interesting.
These high-pressure situations force organizations to make tough decisions, adapt quickly, and innovate in ways we might not normally observe.
It's like putting an organization under a microscope. We can see how its structures, processes, and culture are tested and how they evolve in response to these extreme challenges.
And finally, there's expediency.
Yeah.
This is about choosing a phenomenon that demands attention. Now, think of it like a newsflash. Something is happening that requires immediate investigation because it's evolving so rapidly or has such urgent implications. A recent example would be the COVID-19 pandemic, which forced organizations to rethink everything from remote work to supply chain management.
Right. Researchers had to jump in and start studying these changes as they were happening to understand their impact and help organizations adapt. So you've chosen your phenomenon using these prime criteria. Now what?
Now what?
Well, the next step is framing the phenomenon. It's not enough to simply say, I'm interested in studying AI. You need to think about how you're going to approach the topic, what specific aspects you'll focus on, and what theoretical lens you'll use to interpret your findings.
True.
The authors break down framing into 4 key considerations. First, you've got theoretical grounding. Even though phenomenon-based research is driven by the phenomenon itself, it still needs to be grounded in existing theory. Theory provides a framework for understanding the why behind the what.
For example, if we're studying the use of AI in hiring, we might draw on social cognitive theory to understand how people's perceptions of AI influence their interactions with these systems.
Okay.
Or we could use organizational learning theory to explore how organizations integrate AI into their decision-making processes.
The second consideration is stakeholder perspectives. Every phenomenon involves multiple stakeholders, each with their own interests, goals, and perspectives.
Right.
To get a complete picture of the phenomenon, you need to consider all of these different viewpoints.
Think about the gig economy. You've got the gig workers themselves, the platforms that connect them with clients, the companies that hire them, and the regulators who oversee this new form of work. Each stakeholder has a different story to tell, and understanding those stories is crucial for developing a nuanced understanding of the gig economy as a whole.
Then there's a level of analysis. Are you going to focus on individuals, teams, organizations, or even broader societal systems? The level you choose will shape the kinds of questions you ask, the data you collect, and the conclusions you draw.
For example, if you're studying innovation, you can focus on individual creativity team dynamics that foster new ideas, organizational structures that support innovation, or even how innovation spreads across entire industries. Each level offers a different perspective on the phenomenon.
And finally, you've got construal, how you perceive and interpret the phenomenon. The authors point out that we can construe a phenomena as either a process unfolding over time or as an event with immediate consequences. How you construe the phenomenon will influence your research design and the kinds of data you collect.
Let's say you're studying organizational change. You could construe it as a series of stages with different challenges and opportunities at each step.
Okay.
Or you could focus on a specific event, like a merger or acquisition, and study its immediate impact on the organization.
I think this is a really important point because it highlights how our own assumptions and perspectives can shape the way we see and study the world.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in our own biases and preconceived notions.
So we've chosen our phenomenon, we've framed it carefully. Now it's time to think about data collection, and this is where things can get tricky. With phenomenon-based research, traditional research often relies on established data sets and methods, but when you're exploring uncharted territory, you need to be more creative and adaptable.
Right, it's like venturing into the unknown.
Yeah.
You don't always know what you're going to find or how you're going to find it.
Exactly. The authors highlight 3 types of phenomena that present unique data collection challenges. First up, you've got new phenomena. These are things that are so new or emerging that there may be no existing data sources to draw on. Think about something like the metaverse. It's such a new concept that there isn't a lot of data out there yet to help us understand its impact.
Right. In these cases, you might have to get creative and use qualitative methods like in-depth interviews with early adopters or ethnographic observations of online communities. You might even have to develop entirely new methods for collecting and analyzing data.
Then you've got extreme or sensitive phenomena. These are phenomena that are either difficult to study because they are rare or unpredictable, or they involve sensitive topics that require careful ethical consideration. Think about something like the impact of war on businesses or the experiences of refugees. These are phenomena that can be incredibly difficult to study, both logistically and ethically.
Exactly. You might need to rely on a combination of methods like archival research interviews with experts, or even firsthand accounts from people who have experienced the phenomenon directly.
Yeah.
And you need to be incredibly sensitive to the ethical implications of your research, ensuring that you are not putting anyone at risk or exploiting their experiences.
And finally, there are inaccessible phenomena. These might be organizations or groups that are highly secretive, geographically remote, or simply difficult to reach.
I see.
Think about trying to study the decision-making processes of a secretive government agency or the cultural practices of an isolated indigenous tribe. These are phenomena that require a lot of resourcefulness and creativity to study.
You might need to rely on indirect methods like analyzing public statements or media coverage, or you might need to build relationships with key informants who can provide you with insights. The key takeaway here is that phenomenon-based research often requires us to think outside the box when it comes to data collection.
Absolutely. We need to be resourceful, adaptable, and ethically mindful.
Before we move on to potential constraints researchers might face, I think it would be helpful to look at some real-world examples the authors provide to illustrate how they tackle these challenges in their own research.
Yeah, I think that would be really insightful. Let's hear about those. It's easy to get excited about a research idea, but we have to be realistic about the challenges we might encounter. I think these constraints offer valuable guidance, almost like a reality check.
Absolutely, starting with cultural, social, and political constraints. Now, these can be really tricky, especially if you're studying a phenomenon in a context that's very different from your own. What are some key things researchers need to keep in mind?
Well, first and foremost, researchers need to be aware of the cultural norms and values of the communities they're studying. What might be considered acceptable research practice in one culture could be completely inappropriate in another. It's about respect, sensitivity, and building trust.
I imagine this also ties into power dynamics. Researchers often come from positions of privilege, and it's crucial to be mindful of that when interacting with participants. We can't just parachute in, collect data, and leave without considering the potential impact on the community.
Exactly. It's about building genuine partnerships, listening to the voices of those who are often marginalized, and ensuring that your research benefits the community, not just your own career. Sometimes that means adjusting your research, questioning your methods, or even your entire project to be more culturally appropriate and ethically sound.
Now let's shift gears to logistical constraints, which are often overlooked. As you mentioned earlier, some phenomena are just inherently difficult to study. It's not always about cultural or political barriers, but simply the nature of the phenomenon itself.
Absolutely. Think about researching the aftermath of a major earthquake in a remote region. Getting to the location, finding participants, and collecting data in a disaster zone would be incredibly challenging. You might have limited access to resources, unreliable communication, and safety concerns to contend with.
You'd need to be incredibly resourceful, maybe relying on satellite imagery, remote sensing data, or even historical records to piece together the story. And flexibility is key. You might have to adapt your research design on the fly as new challenges emerge. It's not the kind of research you can plan out perfectly in advance.
Speaking of planning, let's not forget about ethical considerations. We touched on this briefly earlier, but it's worth emphasizing how crucial ethics are, especially in phenomenon-based research where we might be dealing with sensitive or controversial topics.
Absolutely. Imagine researching something like workplace bullying or the experiences of undocumented immigrants. You're dealing with people's lived experiences, often involving vulnerability and potential harm. Protecting participants' privacy and confidentiality is paramount.
And obtaining informed consent is non-negotiable. Participants need to understand the risks and benefits of participating in the research and have the freedom to choose whether or not to participate without any pressure or coercion. It's about empowering them and respecting their autonomy.
And it's not just about following the rules. Researchers need to engage in ongoing ethical reflection throughout the research process, asking tough questions, being open to different perspectives, and being willing to adjust their approach if necessary.
Now let's delve into a constraint that's often invisible to those outside academic and institutional constraints. The academic world has its own incentives and rewards that don't always align with the goals of phenomenon-based research. What are some of the key challenges here?
Well, one big one is the pressure to publish in top-tier journals, which often prioritize research that makes a novel theoretical contribution. That's great if you're trying to build or extend a theory, but it can be a barrier if you're simply trying to understand a complex phenomenon in depth. You can feel like we're putting the cart before the horse sometimes.
Right. And as we mentioned earlier, there's a tendency in academia to favor quantitative methods over qualitative methods. This can make it difficult to study phenomena that are complex, subjective, or context-dependent, where qualitative methods might be more appropriate. But the good news is that some journals, like the Journal of Management, are starting to recognize the value of phenomenon-based research and are encouraging a more diverse range of methods and approaches.
That's really encouraging to hear. It seems like the tide is starting to turn, but even with these positive changes, there's still the issue of resource constraints, which can be a major hurdle for any research project.
Absolutely. Research can be expensive, especially if you're studying a phenomenon that requires long-term data collection, specialized equipment, or travel to remote locations. And even if you have a great research question and a solid plan, you might hit a roadblock if you can't secure the necessary funding.
It's a common challenge for researchers across all disciplines, but it can be particularly acute for phenomenon-based research, which often requires more flexible funding models and a willingness to be creative with resources.
I think collaboration is key here. Partnering with other institutions, seeking funding from non-traditional sources, and leveraging open source data and tools can help stretch your resources and make your research more feasible. It's about being resourceful and finding creative solutions.
And ultimately, it's about finding a balance between ambition and feasibility. You want your research question to be interesting and impactful, but it also needs to be answerable within the constraints of your resources. Sometimes that means scaling back your ambitions or finding ways to be more efficient with your data collection and analysis.
I think the authors make a really important point when they say that these constraints are not meant to discourage researchers, but rather to guide them toward responsible and impactful investigations. By acknowledging these challenges up front, we can develop strategies to mitigate their impact and ensure that phenomenon-based research continues to thrive.
So we've covered a lot of ground discussing the promises and pitfalls of phenomenon-based research. It's clear that this approach has the potential to lead to new insights, challenge existing theories, and inform practical solutions to real-world problems. But it also comes with its fair share of challenges. It requires researchers to be thoughtful, adaptable, and persistent.
Absolutely. It's not a quick fix or a magic bullet, but it's a powerful approach that can help us better understand the complex world we live in. And as the world becomes increasingly complex and unpredictable, this approach will only become more valuable.
Before we move on to the final part of our deep dive where we'll explore the practical implications of phenomena-based research, let's circle back to those prime criteria for choosing a phenomenon.
Yeah.
It's not just about finding a topic that's interesting or novel. It's about choosing a phenomenon that has the potential to make a real impact, to push the boundaries of our understanding.
It's about choosing a phenomenon that's pertinent to real-world issues, has a wide reach, offers new insights, magnifies our understanding, and demands our attention. Now, I encourage our listeners to think about their own research interest. What phenomenon are you truly passionate about? What puzzle are you driven to solve? What contribution do you want to make to the world?
And once you've found that phenomenon, don't let the constraints hold you back. Be creative, be resourceful, be persistent. Remember, the journey of discovery is just as important as the destination. In our next segment, we'll explore how this journey of discovery can lead to real-world impact. We'll look at how phenomenon-based research can inform decision-making, drive innovation, and ultimately make a positive difference in the world. Stay with us.
Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit for the final part of our deep dive into phenomenon-based research. We've explored the what, the why, and the how.
Now it's time for the so what. It's all well and good to understand a phenomenon, but how can we actually use that knowledge?
Right, how do we turn insights into action?
And make a real-world impact? That's the million-dollar question. The authors argue that phenomenon-based research can inform decision-making at all levels, from individual managers to policymakers. It's about bridging the gap between theory and practice.
Let's go back to the example of AI in the workplace by deeply understanding how AI is changing the nature of work. We can make more informed decisions about things like job design training programs and even organizational structures.
It's about being proactive.
We can anticipate potential challenges like job displacement or the need for new skills and develop strategies to address them proactively.
Instead of reacting to change, we can get ahead of the curve. It's like having a roadmap for navigating the future of work, helping us create a future that's both innovative and inclusive.
Phenomenon-based research can also be a powerful driver of innovation by identifying emerging trends and understanding the underlying mechanisms. We can create new products, services, and even entirely new business models.
Think about the rise of the sharing economy. Researchers who were paying attention to this phenomenon early on were able to pinpoint the key factors driving its growth, like the desire for access over ownership and the power of online platforms.
And that understanding led to the creation of companies like Airbnb and Uber,
which disrupted entire industries. And it's not just about creating new companies. Phenomenon-based research can also help existing organizations innovate and adapt.
By studying how other organizations are responding to a particular phenomenon,
companies can learn from best practices, identify potential pitfalls, and develop more effective strategies.
It's like having a window into the future, a chance to see what's working and what's not before you make your own move. And the impact of phenomenon-based research extends beyond the business world. It can also inform policy decisions, helping governments address pressing social issues.
Think about climate change.
By understanding how different communities are experiencing the effects of climate change, we can develop more targeted and effective policies to mitigate those effects and promote environmental justice. It's about using research to create a more sustainable and equitable future.
So phenomenon-based research is not just an academic exercise. It has the potential to make a real difference in the world. It's an approach that's both rigorous and relevant, combining academic depth with practical insights.
And as the world becomes increasingly complex and unpredictable, this approach will only become more valuable.
Absolutely. It equips us with the tools we need to navigate uncertainty, solve problems, and create a better future. It's about asking the right questions, challenging our assumptions, and embracing the complexity of the world around us.
Let's recap the key takeaways from our deep dive phenomenon-based research is about letting the puzzle of a real-world phenomenon guide our research agenda.
Instead of trying to force it into a pre-existing theoretical box.
It's about using existing theories as lenses to illuminate the phenomenon, not forcing it into a pre-existing theoretical box.
It's about choosing phenomena that are pertinent, have a wide reach, offer new insights, magnify our understanding, and demand our attention now.
And it's about framing those phenomena thoughtfully, considering theoretical grounding, stakeholder perspectives, level of analysis, and whether we construe the phenomenon as a process or an event.
It's about being creative and adaptable in our data collection, especially when dealing with new, extreme, or inaccessible phenomena.
And acknowledging potential constraints, cultural, logistical, ethical, academic, and resource-related, and finding ways to work within those constraints.
And most importantly, it's about using our research to make a positive impact on the world, informing decision-making, driving innovation, and helping to create a better future.
So to our listeners out there, we encourage you to embrace the power of phenomenon-based research. Go out there, find your phenomenon, and start exploring.
And if you're looking for inspiration, be sure to check out the full editorial in the Journal of Management. It's a treasure trove of insights and guidance.
And of course, don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit for more deep dives into the world of management research. We're here to help you navigate the complexities of academia one phenomenon at a time.
If you enjoy our show, we'd love it if you could give us a 5-star rating on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Until next time, happy researching.